Ethan sat quietly by the window, staring out at the backyard. The evening sun cast long shadows across the grass, turning everything golden. In the distance, he could hear the sound of children playing, their laughter echoing faintly through the air. But inside his small house, it was quiet. Too quiet. At just 10 years old, Ethan was used to the silence. His mother, Susan, was often tired. She'd spend her days at work and her nights with a bottle in her hand. Ethan didn't understand much about alcohol, but he knew it made his mother different. When she drank, her soft voice became sharp, and her loving eyes turned distant. Tonight was one of those nights. The house was messy, as usual, with dishes piled high in the sink and old newspapers scattered across the floor. Ethan, like always, had done his best to keep things tidy, but there was only so much a 10-year-old could do. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was getting late, and he hadn't eaten dinner yet. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. His mother would be mad if he made noise right now. From the living room, he could hear the TV blaring. His mother was on the couch, mumbling to herself, the empty bottles on the floor clinking as she shifted in her seat. Ethan wished he could make her feel better. Sometimes he would imagine what it would be like if his mom was like the other moms he saw at school, always smiling, always caring, but that wasn't his life. Suddenly, his mother's voice broke the silence. "Ethan, where are you?" she called, slurring her words. Ethan tensed up, knowing what was coming. "I'm here, Mom," he said softly, walking into the living room. She looked up at him with tired eyes, her face flushed from drinking. "Why haven't you cleaned up? This place is a mess," she yelled, her voice full of frustration. Ethan knew it wasn't really about the mess. His mother was angry at everything, her job, her life, the world, and sometimes she took it out on him. I did clean up, Mom," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Don't talk back to me," she snapped, standing up unsteadily. "You think you know everything, don't you? You think you're better than me." Ethan shook his head quickly, his heart pounding. "No, Mom, Before he could finish, she grabbed her coat from the chair and stumbled toward the door. "I need some air. I can't stand being in this house," she muttered, her words heavy with bitterness. Ethan watched as she fumbled with the door, his chest tightening with worry. "Mom, please don't go. It's dark outside," he said, his voice trembling. He didn't like it when she went out at night. Bad things could happen. But his mother wasn't listening. She pushed the door open and staggered out into the cool evening. Ethan stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. Part of him wanted to follow her, but another part was scared. What if she got even angrier? Minutes passed, and Ethan finally decided to go after her. He grabbed his jacket and rushed outside, his small feet making quick, nervous steps on the gravel driveway. The night air was crisp, and the streetlights flickered faintly in the distance. He could see his mother walking down the road, her movements unsteady, like she was fighting to keep balance. "Mom, wait," Ethan called out, his voice carrying through the still night. His mother didn't respond. She kept walking, her figure growing smaller as she moved further away. Ethan quickened his pace, his heart racing, but before he could catch up, he heard the loud screech of tires. Time seemed to slow down as he watched in horror. A car appeared from the corner, its headlights bright against the dark road, and then it happened. The car swerved, and the sound of the crash echoed in the night. Ethan stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. He couldn't move. His legs felt like they were made of stone. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, people came out of their houses, rushing toward the street. The driver of the car jumped out, shouting for help. Ethan stood frozen, staring at the spot where his mother had been, moments before. His heart felt like it had shattered into a million pieces. He wanted to scream, but no sound came out. He wanted to run to her, but his feet wouldn't move. All he could do was stand there, helpless, as the world around him crumbled. Later, when the police and the ambulance arrived, someone gently pulled Ethan away from the scene. He barely registered what was happening. His mother was gone. Just like that. A kind woman named Sarah knelt down beside him. She had warm eyes and a soft voice. "Ethan, I'm so sorry," she said, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "You're going to be okay. I'll help you." But Ethan didn't feel like he would ever be okay again. Everything felt wrong, and the weight of the world pressed down on his small shoulders. All he had left now was a broken heart and an empty house. The car ride to Maple Hill Home for Kids felt endless. Ethan sat in the back seat, staring out the window as trees and houses blurred past. Sarah, the social worker, sat in the front, occasionally glancing back at him with concern. She hadn't said much since they left the hospital, but Ethan could feel her worry. It was like a thick cloud hanging over them both. Ethan's heart was heavy. He hadn't spoken a word since that awful night. Everything felt numb, his hands, his face, his thoughts. It was hard to believe that just a few days ago he had been in his own home. Now everything was different. His mother was gone, and he was being taken to a place he didn't know, with people he didn't know. The world felt upside down. "We're almost there, Ethan," Sarah said softly, her voice breaking through the fog in his mind. "I know this is hard, but Maple Hill is a good place. The kids there are really nice. You'll make friends, I promise." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't want new friends. He just wanted his mom back, even if she wasn't perfect, even if she yelled sometimes, even if she didn't always take care of him the way other moms did. The car turned onto a long, winding road, and soon a large brick building came into view. It looked old, with ivy crawling up the sides and big windows reflecting the gray sky. A small playground sat to one side, and a group of kids were running around, laughing and playing. But to Ethan, it felt cold and unwelcoming. He shrank deeper into his seat, wishing he could disappear. Sarah parked the car and got out, walking around to open Ethan's door. "Come on, kiddo," she said gently. "Let's go meet everyone." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then slowly stepped out of the car. His legs felt shaky, like they might give out at any moment. He clutched his backpack tightly, the only thing he had from home, and followed Sarah up the front steps. Inside, the building was bright and clean, with colorful posters on the walls and a big, friendly welcome desk. A woman with curly brown hair and a warm smile stood behind the desk, waving as they approached. "Hi, Sarah. This must be Ethan," she said, her voice cheerful. "I'm Mrs. Patterson. Welcome to Maple Hill, Ethan. We're so happy to have you here." Ethan gave a small nod, but he didn't feel happy. He didn't feel anything. He just wanted to go back to the way things were. "Why don't we show you to your room?" Mrs. Patterson suggested, leading them down a long hallway. The sound of kids talking and laughing filled the air, but to Ethan it was all a blur. His mind was elsewhere, replaying memories of his mother, her laugh, the way she smelled of lavender soap, and even the arguments they had. He wished he could hold on to those memories forever. Mrs. Patterson opened a door at the end of the hall. "This is where you'll be staying," she said, stepping inside. The room was small but cozy, with 2 beds, 2 dressers, and a window that overlooked the playground. A pile of books sat on one of the beds, and clothes were neatly folded on the other. "You'll be sharing this room with Sam. He's around your age, and I think you two will get along great." As if on cue, A boy with messy blonde hair burst into the room, his eyes bright with excitement. "Hey, you must be Ethan. I'm Sam," he said, holding out his hand. He was a bit taller than Ethan, with a wide grin and a baseball cap that was slightly too big for his head. Ethan stared at the hand for a moment, unsure of what to do. He wasn't used to this kind of energy, but after a pause, he reached out and shook Sam's hand, feeling a little overwhelmed by the boy's enthusiasm. "Don't worry, this place isn't so bad," Sam said, flopping down on his bed. "I've been here for almost a year. It's kind of like one big sleepover, you know? We've got a playground, video games, and tons of snacks. You'll like it here, I promise." Ethan forced a small smile, but inside, he still felt lost. How could anyone be happy here, away from their real home? He sat down on the edge of his bed, gripping the edge of the blanket. "Do you like soccer?" Sam asked, bouncing up and down. "We've got a pretty good soccer team here. I could show you some tricks if you want. I'm like the best at scoring goals." Before Ethan could respond, the door creaked open again, and a girl with dark straight hair and glasses peeked inside. She was holding a thick book and looked a bit shy. "Hi," she said softly, looking at Ethan. "I'm Emily. I'm, reading The Secret Garden. It's a good book. Do you like books?" Ethan wasn't sure what to say. He hadn't read many books, but Emily's quiet voice made him feel a little calmer. "I guess," he mumbled. Emily smiled a little. "You can borrow one if you want. I have lots of them. Books help me escape, you know, when things are hard." Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure he understood. Could books really make things better? As the evening went on, Sam and Emily talked to Ethan about life at Maple Hill. Sam told him all about the soccer matches and the weekend movie nights. Emily explained how she loved reading in the big armchair by the window when it rained. Ethan listened quietly, but his thoughts kept drifting back to his mom. He missed her, even though things weren't always perfect. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he stared up at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the building. Sam was already snoring in the bed next to him, and Ethan could hear the distant sound of laughter from the other kids. It didn't feel like home. Not yet, but maybe, just maybe, it could become something close to it. Ethan closed his eyes, hoping that tomorrow would be a little easier. The days at Maple Hill began to blur together for Ethan, but not in the way they used to. Slowly, he was getting used to the rhythm of life there. The morning wake-ups, the group breakfasts, and the time spent in the yard with the other kids. At first, it had all felt strange, like he was living someone else's life. But now, little by little, it was starting to feel normal. Almost. Ethan was still quiet, often keeping to himself, but Sam refused to let him stay that way. Every morning, Sam would bounce out of bed with a big grin on his face, ready to fill the day with adventure. "Ethan, come on, let's go. They're making pancakes today," Sam would shout, yanking the blanket off Ethan's bed. Ethan would grumble and pull it back up, but deep down, he couldn't help but smile. Sam's energy was contagious. At breakfast, Sam made sure to sit next to Ethan every day, chatting nonstop about soccer, video games, and his favorite movies. Ethan didn't talk much at first, but slowly he began to feel more comfortable. One day, Sam even made him laugh when he did an impression of their caretaker, Mrs. Patterson, trying to dance. It wasn't just a small chuckle. It was a real, full laugh. And for a moment, Ethan forgot all the sadness he had been carrying. "That's the spirit, Ethan. I knew I'd get you to laugh," Sam said, beaming with pride. "You're going to be my soccer sidekick soon. Just wait." Soccer was a big deal at Maple Hill. Every afternoon, the kids would gather in the yard for a game with Sam always leading the charge. Ethan didn't know much about soccer, but Sam was determined to teach him. At first, Ethan was hesitant, feeling awkward and unsure. But Sam wouldn't take no for an answer. "You don't have to be good right away. Just kick the ball, Ethan. Come on," Sam urged, tossing a soccer ball toward him. Reluctantly, Ethan kicked it, and to his surprise, the ball sailed further than he expected. "Nice one," Sam shouted, running after it. Soon the two boys were running across the field, laughing as they chased the ball. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt free, like the weight on his chest had lightened, even if just for a moment. It wasn't just Sam who helped Ethan feel more at ease. Emily, the quiet girl with the glasses, was becoming a big part of his days too. She still spent a lot of time with her books, always curled up in the corner of the common room with her nose buried in a story. But now she wasn't alone. One afternoon, while Sam was off playing soccer with some of the other kids, Ethan found himself wandering into the common room. Emily was sitting in her usual spot, flipping through a thick novel. She glanced up when she saw Ethan and smiled shyly. "Hey," she said softly, pushing her glasses up her nose. "Do you want to sit here?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, but then nodded and sat down next to her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, Emily reading and Ethan simply staring out the window. But eventually, curiosity got the better of him. What are you reading?" he asked quietly. Emily looked up, surprised that he'd spoken. "It's called The Secret Garden," she said, her eyes lighting up a little. "It's about a girl who finds a hidden garden and brings it back to life. It's one of my favorites." Ethan wasn't sure what to say. He hadn't read many books, but something about the way Emily talked about it made him want to try. "Can I read it too?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily's face lit up. "Of course. Here, you can start with this," she said, handing him a different book. It was shorter than the one she was reading, with a bright, colorful cover. "It's called Charlotte's Web. It's really good. I think you'll like it." Ethan took the book, feeling a little nervous, but also excited. He wasn't sure if he'd be any good at reading, but it felt nice to be included in something Emily cared about. As the weeks went by, Ethan found himself opening up more. He started reading Charlotte's Web with Emily, one chapter at a time, and each evening they would talk about the story. Sam still pulled him into every soccer game, and Ethan had even started getting better at it, scoring his first goal during one of their matches. The other kids cheered, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he belonged. One of the most memorable days was Sam's birthday. It was a big deal at Maple Hill because birthdays meant cake, games, and presents. The kids gathered in the dining hall, singing loudly as Mrs. Patterson brought out a huge chocolate cake with candles flickering on top. "Make a wish," they all shouted as Sam grinned from ear to ear. Sam closed his eyes, paused for a second, and then blew out the candles. The room erupted in cheers. Ethan found himself smiling, caught up in the excitement. They played games, told jokes, and ate way too much cake. For the first time, Ethan felt truly happy at Maple Hill. Later that day, while the party was still going, Sarah, the social worker, came by to check on Ethan. She found him sitting outside on the porch, watching the sunset. "Hey, Ethan," she said gently, sitting down beside him. "How are you doing?" Ethan shrugged. "I don't know. Better, I guess." Sarah smiled warmly. "That's good to hear. You've been through a lot, Ethan, but you're strong, and you're not alone here. I'm really proud of how well you've adjusted." Ethan nodded, looking down at his hands. He still missed his mom. He probably always would, but somehow things didn't feel so heavy anymore. Do you think I'll ever feel normal again? He asked quietly. Sarah's expression softened. It's okay to miss your mom, Ethan, but you're building something new here. It won't be the same as before, but that doesn't mean it won't be good. You've made friends, and you're finding your way. That's what matters. Ethan thought about that for a moment. She was right. He was finding his way. Sam's jokes, Emily's books, the soccer games, and even Sarah's visits were helping him heal, little by little. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the yard, Ethan realized that Maple Hill was starting to feel like something he hadn't had in a long time, a home. At first, things seemed to be getting better for Ethan. He had Sam's jokes to lift his spirits, and Emily's books to take his mind off the sadness. But at night, when the world went quiet and everyone else was asleep, the memories would come creeping back, the memories of that night. It started with small things, flashes of his mother's voice calling for him, the sound of the door slamming as she left, and then the screech of tires that seemed to echo endlessly in his dreams. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it. The car, the headlights, the moment everything changed. The nightmares followed him into the dark, leaving him drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. At Maple Hill, the days were busy and full of distractions. There were soccer games with Sam, quiet reading time with Emily, and regular visits from Sarah, who always checked on him. But no matter how hard he tried to focus on the present, the nightmares lingered, haunting his nights and weighing down his days. One morning, after a particularly bad night, Ethan sat in the dining hall, pushing his breakfast around his plate. Sam was chattering away about an upcoming soccer match, but Ethan barely heard him. His eyes were fixed on the table, his mind elsewhere. "You okay, Ethan?" Sam asked, noticing his friend's silence. Ethan didn't answer right away. He felt heavy, like he was sinking into a deep pit, unable to climb out. Finally, he shrugged. "Yeah, I'm fine," he mumbled. But Sam wasn't convinced. "You sure? You've been acting kind of different lately." Ethan forced a weak smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine," he repeated, though the words felt empty. Inside, he was anything but fine. He hadn't told anyone about the nightmares or the guilt that was eating away at him. He didn't want to burden his friends with the darkness that seemed to follow him everywhere. As the days went by, Ethan began pulling away from everyone. He stopped joining the soccer games, even when Sam begged him to play. He spent less time reading with Emily, retreating to his room instead. The weight of his guilt grew heavier with each passing day, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that the accident was his fault. If only he had stopped his mother from leaving that night. If only he had been braver, said the right thing, done something, anything, to change what had happened. It was like a loop in his mind, playing over and over again, trapping him in a web of blame. One evening, after another restless night, Ethan sat alone on the porch, staring out at the fading light of the sunset. The other kids were inside, laughing and playing, but he couldn't bring himself to join them. He felt like he didn't belong, like he didn't deserve to be happy when his mother was gone. The door creaked open, and Sarah stepped outside. She had a way of knowing when something was wrong, even when Ethan didn't say a word. "Hey, Ethan," she said gently, sitting down beside him. "Mind if I join you?" Ethan shrugged, not looking up. Sarah sat quietly for a moment, watching the sunset with him. After a few minutes of silence, she spoke again. "I've noticed you've been a little distant lately. Do you want to talk about what's going on?" Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to open up the wound that was already too deep. But at the same time, the weight of his guilt was becoming too much to carry alone. His eyes filled with tears, and before he could stop himself, the words came pouring out. "It's my fault," he whispered, his voice trembling. Sarah looked at him, her brow furrowed in concern. "What's your fault, Ethan?" "The accident," Ethan said, choking on the words. "My mom, I should have stopped her. I should have done something. If I hadn't let her go, she'd still be here." His shoulders shook with the force of his tears, the dam finally breaking after weeks of holding everything inside. He covered his face with his hands, ashamed of how weak he felt. Sarah's heart broke for him. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice soft but firm. "Ethan, listen to me. What happened to your mom was not your fault. You couldn't have stopped her from leaving that night. You were just a boy, and there's only so much you could have done." "But I didn't even try," Ethan sobbed, the guilt tearing him apart. "I didn't try hard enough." "You did everything you could, Ethan," Sarah said gently. "Your mom loved you, but she was going through things that were beyond your control. Sometimes, no matter how much we want to help someone, we can't fix what's hurting them. What happened was a tragedy, but it wasn't your fault." Ethan shook his head, unable to accept her words. The guilt had been his constant companion for so long that he didn't know how to let it go. Sarah took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I know this is hard to believe right now, but your mom wouldn't want you to carry this burden. She wouldn't want you to blame yourself for what happened. She loved you, Ethan, and you brought her joy, even when things were tough. That's what you need to hold on to, the love you shared, not the pain." Ethan's tears slowed as Sarah's words sank in. For so long he had been holding on to the idea that he could have prevented the accident, that somehow it was his fault. But hearing Sarah say that it wasn't, hearing someone tell him that he wasn't to blame, it felt like a small light breaking through the darkness. "I just miss her," Ethan whispered, his voice small and fragile. "I know," Sarah said softly. "It's okay to miss her. It's okay to feel sad. But don't let that sadness make you forget all the good things you shared with her, your memories of her. Those are what will keep her close to you." Ethan wiped his eyes, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The guilt was still there, lingering in the background, but it didn't feel as heavy anymore. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't his fault. Sarah stayed with him on the porch for a while, neither of them speaking, just watching the sunset over the horizon. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a small spark of hope. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he had thought. Maybe he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders anymore. And maybe, just maybe, he could start to heal. The sun shone brightly through the windows of Maple Hill Home for Kids, casting warm beams of light across the dining hall. Ethan sat at the usual table with Sam and Emily, enjoying his breakfast. It had been a few weeks since his emotional talk with Sarah, and although the pain of losing his mother still lingered, something had shifted inside him. The heavy guilt he had been carrying for so long was no longer suffocating him. He was beginning to see the world in color again. "Hey, Ethan, you gonna help me score the winning goal today?" Sam asked, grinning as he stuffed his face with scrambled eggs. "The big soccer match is this afternoon. Remember, we need our star player." Ethan smirked, shaking his head. "I don't know if I'm the star player. That's more your thing, Sam." "Come on, I saw you last time. You've got skills," Sam insisted, leaning in with a playful wink. "You're my secret weapon." Ethan laughed. He still wasn't as good at soccer as Sam, but over time he'd learned to enjoy the game. Sam had been relentless in dragging him out to the field every day, and now Ethan actually looked forward to their matches. He wasn't just playing for the sake of it anymore, he was having fun. Emily, sitting across from them, smiled softly as she listened to their banter. "You two and your soccer," she said, rolling her eyes with good-natured teasing. "You know, Ethan, I'm still waiting for you to finish Charlotte's Web. You promised we could talk about the ending." Ethan nodded, feeling a little proud of himself. He had been reading more lately, and not just because Emily encouraged him. The stories had become an escape for him, a way to explore new worlds and ideas. Emily's love for books had rubbed off on him, and now it was something they shared. They often sat together in the common room, reading quietly side by side. It was one of Ethan's favorite parts of the day. "I'll finish it soon," Ethan promised. "I'm almost at the end." Emily beamed. "Good, because I have another book lined up for you after that one. It's called Bridge to Terabithia. I think you'll really like it." Ethan felt a warmth spread through his chest. He liked how Emily always knew the perfect book to recommend, and how Sam never let him sit alone for too long. They had become more than just friends. They were his family now. It was a strange feeling, realizing that Maple Hill, the place that once felt so foreign and intimidating, had become his home. Later that afternoon, the kids gathered in the yard for their big soccer match. The sun was high, the grass soft under their feet, and the air buzzing with excitement. Sam, as usual, took charge, calling out positions and hyping everyone up. "All right, team, this is it. We've trained for this. Now let's show them what we're made of." Sam shouted, fist raised in the air. Ethan stood by his side, feeling a nervous flutter in his stomach, but also an unexpected thrill. He had come a long way since his first awkward attempts at playing. Now, as he glanced around at the other kids, all cheering and eager to win, he felt like he truly belonged. The game was fast-paced, full of laughter, shouts, and the sound of feet thudding against the ball. Ethan ran up and down the field, his heart racing with adrenaline. Every time the ball came his way, he kicked it with newfound confidence. And when Sam finally passed him the ball in a perfect play, Ethan's instincts took over. He dribbled down the field, dodged a defender, and wham! Kicked the ball straight into the goal. The kids erupted in cheers, and Sam tackled him in a playful hug. "Yes, I knew you could do it," Sam yelled, ruffling Ethan's hair. Ethan laughed, breathless and filled with joy. It wasn't just the victory that made him smile. It was the feeling of being part of something, of being accepted and valued by the people around him. As the sun began to set and the game wound down, Ethan found himself sitting on the grass with Sam and Emily, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. The evening air was cool, and the sound of laughter filled the yard as the other kids gathered around to share stories about the game. Ethan leaned back on his hands, staring up at the sky. For the first time in a long while, he felt at peace. There was still sadness in his heart, and he knew there always would be. He still missed his mother deeply, but now he understood that her death wasn't his fault. The guilt no longer weighed him down, and he could finally allow himself to move forward. Sarah, the social worker, approached them, smiling as she watched the kids from a distance. She had been keeping an eye on Ethan, checking in on him regularly. Seeing him laughing with his friends, relaxed and happy, filled her with pride. "Hey, Ethan," she called softly, walking over to sit beside him. "How's the new soccer star doing?" Ethan grinned, shrugging. "I think Sam's still the real star." "Well, I saw that goal you scored. Pretty impressive," Sarah said, nudging him gently. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last rays of the sun dip below the horizon. "You seem happy," Sarah said after a while. "How are you feeling?" Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "I'm okay. Better, actually. I still miss my mom, but I feel like things are getting better, like maybe I can be happy here." Sarah smiled warmly. "You've come a long way, Ethan. I'm really proud of you." Ethan nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment. He had come a long way, and while the road ahead wasn't always going to be easy, he knew he wasn't alone. He had friends who cared about him, people who supported him, and a future that didn't seem so dark anymore. As the sky faded into twilight, Ethan looked around at the faces of the people who had become his family. Sam, still talking excitedly about the game, Emily, quietly reading a book even in the fading light, and Sarah, always there with a kind word and a reassuring smile. For the first time since the accident, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be, and for the first time in a long while, he smiled. Not just because something funny had happened, but because he truly felt happy. The past had been painful, and there were still hard days ahead, but now Ethan knew that he could face them. He had a new beginning, a new home, and people who cared about him. Whatever came next, Ethan was ready.